also left a mark on the world stage. Can you talk about the international efforts that...
Yes, and part of the mark was, again, as it was in Canada, a human mark. He was able to get along with people who were not always easy to get along with. He didn't kowtow to them at all, but he knew what their merits were. He made sure they knew what ours were, what his were, and he won their respect. It wasn't, it was genuine. I think it began, as all these things do, with a question, who is this new guy? But he quite quickly established personal relations with a wide range of leaders. I was doing a lot of work in the developing world at that time, and some of those people, some of those leaders were not like the ones we would encounter in, except in the Commonwealth. But Brian was able to establish both links, and links based on respect, and links earning reciprocal respect with so many of them. And does that matter? I recall a G7 meeting somewhere in Europe, and there was a call that took Brian out of the room. And what it was Kenneth Kaunda, then leading the government in Zambia, who had a really major problem, and it needed the intervention of the G7. And Brian Mulroney, Prime Minister of Canada, took the call, came back in, made the request, and the G7 was able to respond to a legitimate concern that Zambia, little Zambia, had. That was characteristic of the man. He was able to strike friendships and make the best of them.
What did you say when you had the chance to approach the coffin, the casket?
I simply talked about the changes he made in the country, and his ability to take his substantial talents and apply them with enormous consistency and discipline to trying to make the country a better place.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So much.
C'était grand homme d'État, excusez-moi, c'était grand homme d'État pour le Canada, un fils du Québec, quelqu'un qui a rendu le pays très fier. C'est un père de famille. Il laisse un grand patrimoine pour tous les Canadiens et nous sommes très reconnaissants pour la famille Mulroney. Et on est ici pour rendre hommage à un grand homme. We're here today to honor the brilliant legacy of a great statesman who made enormous sacrifices to serve his country, who left Canadians freer, richer, safer, and better off. And we, Anna, my wife and I, are here today to honor him and the incredible contribution of the Mulroney family. Thank you.
Over the last number of years, I had the immense privilege to get to become a friend of Mr. Mulroney's. He helped get a project off the ground back in my own community. He was actually my first MP while I was born, and we have a common alma mater at St. X. And after we had worked together to help get the Institute of Government in his name off the ground at campus, I pitched an idea to him around the Atlantic Economic Forum, and it didn't have much momentum until he picked up the phone, as he was known to do. And I'm telling you, once he bought into the project, everybody wanted to be a part of it. The guy wanted to give his talents to Canada until the very end. Through the pandemic, I relied on him for advice. At peak, we were talking a couple of times a week. We're going to miss him. He made an extraordinary difference for my community, but for the entire country, and we'll miss the benefit of his sage wisdom and advice that he was ready to provide whenever asked. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Look, he was a remarkable leader. Canada's never stood stronger on the world stage for our values and interests, both economic with free trade, but his leadership helping end apartheid. When Nelson Mandela came here to thank Canada, that was real leadership at a time we punched above our weight, and I don't think Canada has punched at that level since. And then some of his economic reforms, the economy we have today really was set in motion almost 40 years ago by Brian Mulroney. So I think it's been great to see a lot of Canadians remember that and honor his memory.
And I heard you mention that he had called your wife previously. Can you recount that time, please?
Well, after I gave up the leadership, after a vote of my caucus, when these streets were filled with trucks, it was a very tough time. I put my phone away when I got home, and Brian couldn't reach my phone, so he called my wife's cell phone. He tracked that number down because he knew a friend could use a conversation and a pep talk at a tough time. That's what's remarkable, and it's been great to hear so many other people from different political parties, from media, from academia. A phone call from Brian Mulroney, particularly after a challenging time or a death in the family, just showed a remarkable character that he had. And he'll be missed, but his legacy is our great country.
And what do you think current politicians could learn from Mr. Mulroney?
That I think, particularly if we're seeing what's happening in the United States, we're seeing, the polarization. I think taking some lessons on how he could be partisan but positive, how he could have respect for his adversaries. I think that's something all parties can take a lot away from, and it's been nice to see all parties honoring his legacy.
Si on peut vous entendre en français, M. O'Toole, de quoi le Canada se souviendra surtout de M. Mulroney, selon vous?
Il était un leader extraordinaire pour le Canada. Dans une époque difficile, il a eu une approche positive sur la scène internationale, particulièrement concernant l'apartheid et la situation avec Nelson Mandela. Il a mis la pression sur Ronald Reagan et Margaret Thatcher, et on a eu une réputation solide à ce temps-là grâce à lui. Donc, il y a des leçons pour M. Trudeau, pour M. Poilievre, et d'avoir une approche de respect pour les autres partis, les autres députés aussi. C'était une approche de M. Mulroney, et j'ai eu beaucoup de respect pour ça.
Et très brièvement, pouvez-vous raconter cette anecdote que vous avez racontée à mes collègues dans la langue de Shakespeare? Il vous a téléphoné personnellement ou à des moments difficiles?
Oui, il était un mentor pour moi pendant mon temps comme leader de notre parti, des conservateurs. Mais après mon vote avec notre caucus, j'ai fait rien de phone calls, des appels, mais M. Mulroney a appelé ma femme. Et de parler avec elle, mais de trouver une approche de parler avec moi aussi. Et c'était important à ce temps-là, un temps difficile personnellement pour moi, d'avoir un appel avec M. Mulroney et l'amitié, quelques blagues et quelques mots de pep talk pour moi. C'est un souvenir important pour moi dans ma vie politique. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Bonne journée.
J'ai eu la grande chance de servir le Canada ici au Parlement avec M. Harper, mais tout ça, ça part de M. Mulroney qui m'a donné le goût d'être un conservateur. Puis, comme je le disais tantôt à un de vos collègues, il a donné aux Canadiens français le désir de voter conservateur lorsqu'il s'est présenté en politique.
Qu'est-ce qui vous a donné ce désir?
Bien, c'est son désir à lui de vouloir ramener le Québec dans la grande famille canadienne. Alors, ceux d'entre nous qui avaient été fortement choqués par la façon dont les négociations constitutionnelles s'étaient produites sans la présence du Québec, on sait que M. Mulroney a tenté de régler cette situation et de ramener le Québec dans le giron canadien. Et ça, pour moi, c'était un pas important. Ça méritait mon appui, ça méritait l'appui des Québécois.
Vous l'avez connu personnellement, M.
Absolument.
Mulroney?
Absolument. On a pratiqué dans le même cabinet juridique avant que ma carrière bancaire. J'étais avocat et dans le même cabinet que lui. Donc, je l'ai côtoyé beaucoup.
Beaucoup de gens parlent de sa personnalité. Il était très convivial.
Oui.
Il aimait les gens, peu importe de quelle appartenance politique ils avaient.
Oui, tout à fait. C'est quelqu'un qui bâtissait des ponts. Alors, il a commencé comme avocat en droit du travail. Il négociait des conventions collectives. Alors, des conventions collectives, tu as deux choix. Ou tu te fâches avec le syndicat, puis il n'y a pas d'entente, ou tu trouves une façon de t'entendre. Et avec Brian, il y avait toujours une façon de s'entendre. C'est quelqu'un qui cherchait des ententes, qui cherchait à bâtir des ponts.
Est-ce qu'il y a, en terminant, des leçons en Brian Mulroney pour les hommes et les femmes politiques d'aujourd'hui?
Oui, je pense que la partisanerie a sa place, mais en même temps, je pense qu'il faut aussi tendre la main à ses adversaires pour trouver des solutions.
Merci, M. Fortier.
Merci.
Merci. Vous allez au revoir.
Merci.
Mr. Fortier, just to see back, can I ask you in English, just for your reminiscences of Mr. Mulroney, what you're thinking about on this day?
Well, he's largely responsible for me being involved in politics and being a conservative. He made it cool to be a conservative in the 80s in Quebec, and so first time I voted conservative. He got me involved in politics, and ultimately I wound up here serving in a Conservative government.
So what do you think his legacy then specifically is for the province of Quebec with his attempts to bring the Constitution home to Quebec?
Well, I think his legacy is more than that. Obviously, his attempt to get Quebec back into the fold will be remembered by many, but also the free trade agreement. And I think making all of us, I think when he came after Pierre Trudeau, people forget, but we were almost an unaligned country at the time. Pierre Trudeau wasn't spending a lot of time in Washington. He was very concerned about Canada's sovereignty, and Mulroney said, wait a second, we can be sovereign, but we can have a relationship with the Americans. We can have a commercial relationship, we can have a political relationship with the Americans. And I think he brought us to that level where we felt we were confident enough to have that free trade agreement with the U.S.
He twice tried to get Quebec into the Constitution. His second attempt, the Charlottetown Accord, was pretty soundly rejected by Quebecers. How is he remembered in Quebec, do you think?
He's fondly remembered. You'll see this at the end of the week and on Thursday and Friday in the streets in Montreal. He's a son of Quebec, and people there love him. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Je dois dire que M. Mulroney a été quelqu'un d'une grande sensibilité, d'une grande attention à mon endroit. Et dans les moments les plus difficiles, il a toujours été là et ses mots ont toujours été justes. Je pense qu'il avait cette façon de porter la diplomatie en ayant vraiment à cœur les gens. Je pense en particulier à tout le combat qu'il a mené dans la lutte contre l'apartheid en Afrique du Sud. Je pense à son plaidoyer qui était tellement exemplaire pour la libération de Nelson Mandela. Il m'a raconté cela longuement alors que nous nous rendions d'ailleurs aux funérailles de Nelson Mandela. Et il me disait combien ça avait été épique, combien il s'était bagarré même avec Madame Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, avec aussi Monsieur Ronald Reagan à l'époque, président des États-Unis. Et parce qu'il trouvait qu'il n'en faisait pas assez. Donc, c'est l'homme dont je me souviens, c'est l'homme d'État dont je me souviens, c'est-à-dire celui courageux, qui persévérait, qui persistait et qui n'a jamais renoncé à ses convictions. Et j'aimerais que ce soit comme ça aussi qu'on se souvienne de lui.
En anglais, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, please. I think what I really appreciated with the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney is how he cared. You know, he cared for people. And he did that also. He cared for me in difficult times. I remember when there was some adversity about my appointment as 27th Governor General of Canada, how he would call me, and his words were always the right ones. And the way also he took up, you know, the fight against apartheid, that cause meant a lot to him. And when we were together at the funeral of Nelson Mandela, because he pleaded a lot for his release from jail, he told me how epic it had been, how he quarreled with Margaret Thatcher, how he did also with Ronald Reagan, saying, you know, to them that they were not doing enough. And the day Nelson Mandela was released on February 11th, 1990, it was a great day for Brian Mulroney, because it was the day he had hoped and pleaded for with the greatest conviction. And I think we should remember him also. That was the kind of statesman Brian Mulroney was. He would persist when others would just give up.
How did you feel inside?
It's very impressive inside, with all the family there, of course, for the coffin. So I had words for him. That's the way I am. I addressed him some words, and it's very moving because since I learned about his death, I keep hearing his voice because he's been there for me in many times. He would call when I was the 27th Governor General of Canada. I was always surprised, but he would follow everything. And when there were moments that he knew that were trying, he always had, you know, the right words, and that I truly appreciated. We were together also, you know, at the funeral of Nelson Mandela, and he told me the epic, fight it was, how he quarreled with those who wouldn't do enough. He did with Margaret Thatcher, he did with Ronald Reagan, telling them that they had to do more because apartheid was a crime against humanity in South Africa. So I really, like his sense of conviction.
Are you comfortable saying the words that you shared with him?
The words he shared?
The words you shared with him.
With him?
Yeah,
that my heart is with him. That I said to him that he meant a lot to me in difficult times, when he would take the time to call me. He did not wait for you to call him, he would call you. And his words were always the right ones. Never patronizing, but knowing the solitude that it is to be in power, to be confronted to difficult decisions to make, and confronted to adversity. He had experienced that, and he understood it.
Thank you. C'est un petit mot au sujet de M. Mulroney. Vous l'avez très bien connu sur plusieurs facettes, n'est-ce pas?
Nous honorons un homme extraordinaire, canadien, qui a servi le pays dans l'éclat. C'est un jour très sombre pour nous et pour tous les Canadiens.
Qu'est-ce qui vous a particulièrement marqué chez vous?
Je suis très impressionné, particulièrement avec l'empathie et les confiances, empathie et trust. Un homme qui a représenté le Canada sur le monde international avec clarté, avec courage. Il sera une légion très importante pour tous les Canadiens.
How did he mark this country? How did he mark this country in your mind?
I think a number of qualities. One, the empathy that he showed in his personal relationships, the trust he established on the international scene, and a person who represented the soft power of Canada and our values, Rod. We need those qualities today. We'll miss him dearly. Thank you so much.
How do you feel in this moment? And did you have any words inside for Mr. Mulroney?
Well, simply to say how well you've served your country, thou good and faithful servants, as the Bible says.
How do you feel right now?
Somber, sad, but inspired by a man who has left such an example for all of us to follow. Thank you so much. Merci.
Is his belief in the importance of this close relationship between the United States and Canada. He in some ways created it, nurtured it, and he institutionalized it so that we still enjoy it today.
How much of that was his personal relationships? Because we know James Baker is going to be speaking at the funeral on Saturday. He was very close to President Reagan and the first President Bush. Talking about how those relationships, it changed the Canadian-U.S. relationship.
So I don't know whether it was his Irish background or his personality. I did not know the man. But he is a world leader that believes in the power of personal relationships to bring countries closer. I think that's the way he practiced his diplomacy. And there's just no doubt that the personal relationship he crafted first with President Reagan, then with President Bush, is a big contributor to his ability to create and nurture this special relationship between the United States and Canada.
Did you ever have an opportunity to speak to him about
I never had an opportunity to meet him. He wasn't in Canada much during my time here. A lot of people said it's a shame because I would have enjoyed him and he would have enjoyed me.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone. Cheers. Thank you.